during Love Gives, we have been understanding the heart that is behind it and the things that we can learn and apply to our own journey. And today, I want to take a look at this idea, and I mentioned already, it's one of the central messages of Christmas. God is with us, but what does that mean? And especially when life is not playing out the way that we think it should, how is it that God is with us? And how do we understand that? And how do we factor that in to our lives day by day? Well, you probably know during the Christmas season, there are a lot of kids who believe that a special person brings some gifts on Christmas morning, right? Well, I came across some letters from kids who are struggling with their confidence in jolly old Saint Nick, and they have some issues. Can I share a few of those together with you? Here's the first one. Dear Santa, you better bring my pony this year or there will be consequences. You're on notice, mister. You better deliver. I love the spelling on this one. Dear Santa, I am writing this on the day after Xmas, and I am very sad. I only received one of the two presents I asked for. Since you ate my cookies, I will assume that my missing gift was a mistake. I will give you 1 week to fix this. You're on the clock, mister. I want an iPhone, buy now, and P.S., get my sister a Panda or else. I don't believe in you, but whatever, says Nicole. She's kind of just throwing her hands up there and might as well just fill it out. And the last one, Dear Santa, even though I know the truth, I want you to know how much I enjoyed believing in you for the past 10 and a half years. Love, Anna. But Anna's out. And I wonder if some of those kids struggling with their understanding of how all of that works might be similar to how some of us struggle to understand, okay, God is with me. What does that mean? And especially when things are not happening in my life the way that I think God would do them, how am I supposed to understand that? And what does it mean? So let's back up a little bit before we jump into understanding and learning about how God is with us. We've been tracking the last few weeks in Matthew's account of the Christmas story. He begins by giving us a genealogy. A genealogy is a long list of names that for us sounds very boring and is difficult to pronounce a lot of those names there. And so I don't know, about you, but there are times I even just kind of jump to the end of that and press on. But Matthew goes out of his way to include some people in that genealogy who have a less than stellar track record when it comes to life before God and even with each other and maybe themselves. And so Matthew is communicating to us, if you have some ways in which you have a less than stellar track record, guess what? Jesus came for you too. And there's good news there. And Matthew was a guy considered to be a bad guy in his day because he was working for the Romans. So he includes a whole bunch of bad people in that as if to say, who's included in what Jesus came to do? Everybody. And then he goes on to introduce us to a man named Joseph. And Joseph, he says, was a faithful man. And for us, that just sounds very general and very generic, but it was pretty specific in that day. It meant that Joseph, like another group of people, he was part of that group. They committed themselves to doing everything that the law of Moses, the Torah, big parts of the Old Testament, if it said it, he did it. And he was absolutely committed to the ways of God. Well, he's also pledged to be married to a woman named Mary. And back then, being pledged was a legally binding marriage contract, but you were not yet living together as a married couple. There was a 1-year time period in which the commitment level of both of those people was really examined. And it's during that time of being pledged that Mary turns up pregnant. And we're not told exactly how Joseph found out, but he was committed to God, and he also didn't want to throw her under the bus and expose her, publicly, and so he decided he was going to divorce her quietly. And it's at that moment Joseph gets a visit from an angel in a dream, which says basically this: do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. And then come these words. All this, everything Joseph has been through, all the generations and all that came before. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. What does that mean? Because sometimes we will say, hey, my thoughts are with you. Well, that's pretty nebulous. That can often be far off. What does it mean that God is with us? And how does that fit as one of the central themes and communications of the Christmas story? Well, if you notice, Matthew says all of this happened to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. So what he's doing is referring back to something that was said at another time or place. Have you ever been reading an article online and then you see some of the print is in blue? And if you put your cursor over that and you click it, it's a hyperlink and it takes you somewhere else? Well, guess what? That was invented by Matthew. No, I'm just kidding. But that's kind of what he's doing here. He's cluing us in and kind of turning this blue to say, if you click on that, guess what? It's going to take you back to where that story took place, because what's happening now is tied to what was said then. And so if you click on that link, it takes you back to OT Prophecy Reference in the New Testament. Roy just made this up. That's not a real website. But if you go there and we follow what the prophet said, it takes us to this place, Isaiah chapter 7. The year is 735 BC, all those years before Jesus was born. And the place is the southern kingdom of Judah. And in that time and place in history, God shows up and makes a promise that Matthew is saying all those years later, this is it. And this is when that promise is being fulfilled. That there's a promise that God made, and now it is a promise that he has kept. So let me give you a little bit of context, and then we're going to walk through these verses. At the time this takes place, the nation of Israel is divided into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. When God first established the nation, it was one nation, but then through some bad leadership on the part of kings, there was a civil war which now split the nation into two. There's a northern part that retained the name Israel. It was also referred to, and you'll see it in a minute, Ephraim, and it's going to get really weird because there are names used interchangeably here. I'm going to do my best to clarify that. The southern kingdom, the red part of this map, is Judah, and that is where these words are going to be spoken, is to the king of Judah, the southern kingdom. And in the context, the bigger context of the region, the green on the map there is the big dog nation of the day. It's called Assyria. And to make things more confusing, there's Syria and Assyria. So they're different. The big dog nation is Assyria, and they have conquered one nation after another. And now, as you can see on this map, they are on the doorstep of conquering both the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah. And it's into that environment where real people are dealing with real issues of the day that these events unfold. Isaiah 7:1, when Ahaz, son of Jotham and son of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, that's another name for Syria, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. And what happened right before then, right? Assyria is on the march, and so now some kingdoms are trying to form an alliance to be a strong enough nation to fight off Assyria because they are very powerful. And the king, Ahaz, of the southern kingdom, Judah, was invited to join that alliance. But you know what he said? He said no. And so when the answer came no, these two nations, Aram and the northern kingdom of Israel, decided to march against the southern kingdom of Israel, Judah. And they conquered some of the territory, but the city of Jerusalem stood strong, and so now the armies have retreated, but now they are on the march again, and they are making their way to Jerusalem. Now the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim, so the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. And the word shaken there, we could substitute the word afraid, right? Fear, anxious. And there's a saying that's been around for a long time that fear is spelled F-E-A-R, and it's kind of cute to say, what does that stand for? False evidence appearing real. And I would say, well, that's quaint, but it's not always true. Because here, there are a couple nations that are actually on the march. There's a battle coming. We fought off one battle. There's a second battle on the doorstep. And the king is afraid, and the people are afraid. There are some situations in life that are not make-believe. They are not false evidence appearing real. Some of them are real. And some of them can cause us to be shaken. Shaken in our faith, shaken in our confidence, shaken wondering where God is in the middle of the real life events like that. Well, we're going to ask some questions as we go along through this. And so let me ask you this question based on that. What do I fear? What is it that maybe causes you, maybe right now, to be shaken, to be afraid? And maybe it's not something you're making up, but it's something that is real. What is it that might have your heart and your faith shaken? Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. I am your servant and your vassal. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Aram, or Syria, and of the king of Israel, who are attacking me. And so Ahaz was invited into this alliance. He said no, and so those two nations got together and had attacked him, and on the way again. Now, here's one of the things you need to understand if you were a king of Israel, is that when God founded the nation, he had made a promise to them that there would be a descendant of King David who would be on that throne perpetually. Ahaz is that guy. And so when these nations are coming against him and they want to remove him, that would run contrary to the promise that God had made. And so if you were the king, you could lean into the promise God made, or you could decide to do something else. You know what Ahaz decides to do? He decides to do something else. I'm not going to turn to God. I'm not going to seek God. I'm not going to worship God through this. I'm not going to inquire of God. I'm going to turn to the king of Assyria. And so a king turns to the king of Assyria rather than the king of the universe. And it really maybe, causes us, to say when we have decisions to make about things that are playing out, where do we put our hope and our confidence? How do we respond to that? Who do we look to save us? Do we factor God into it in any way, shape, or form? Because Ahaz doesn't do that at all. There's not even a mention that he thinks about God. And if you back up a little bit in Ahaz's life, how did he get there? We're told he's the son of Uzziah. Uzziah was one of the great kings. He saw God often, worshiped God, not Ahaz. In fact, Ahaz turned to idols. And on one occasion, we're even told that Ahaz takes some of his own children and sacrifices them in the fires of Molech. And if you know anything about that, that is burning children alive to a pagan god. This is a king who's not thinking about God, not looking in God's direction. And he turns to the king of Assyria and says, will you save me out of the hand? And then turn to the God who promised him that to be a descendant on the throne. So let me ask you this question. How do I respond? Where do I turn when I'm looking for some sort of direction, some level of confidence, some understanding of what's happening and where all of that is going? How do I respond? Do I factor God into the real life things that I am going through? Story continues, and the Lord said to Isaiah, so Ahaz doesn't turn to God at all. Well, now God is going to speak to King Ahaz. He does it through Isaiah. Isaiah is a prophet. Go out, you and your son, Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct at the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field. Say to him, be careful, keep calm, and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood. And when he's talking about two smoldering stubs of firewood, what is he talking about? The northern kingdom of Israel and Aram, or Syria. And when God calls them smoldering stubs of firewood, you know what he's saying? They're nothing. They're has-beens. Their intentions will not happen. And so what does Ahaz do in response to that? When you don't seek God, but God comes to you and now gives you a glimpse of what he sees from his perspective, he gets a little more specific. Aram, Ephraim, and Remaliah's son have plotted your ruin, saying, let us invade Judah, let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves and make the son of Tabeel king over it. What is that? To put in place a puppet king in your place, Ahaz. But it's not going to happen, God says. Remember the promise. It's as if between the lines, God is inviting a king who is in the line of David to remember, I have made a promise. Will you trust the God who made a promise to keep his promise? Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says is going to continue, speaking to Ahaz. It will not take place. It will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered, the northern kingdom, to be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. God basically says the intentions they have, they're not going to happen. And then he says these profound words: if you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. King Ahaz, it's like you got a foot in Assyria and you got a foot over here in your own kingdom. You have to make up your mind where your confidence, where your hope is found. Because right now you're dividing yourself in all kinds of different directions. Will you seek God's vision of what is playing out here so that you can apply it to a real life scenario that you're in the middle of right now? And so let me ask you this question. Who do I listen to? When I'm going through the circumstances of life, where am I looking for some kind of vision, some sense of direction, some sort of confidence to give me leadership direction? And Ahaz pretty much had blanked God out of his life, doesn't turn in his direction. God comes to him anyway, but he even fends that off. But how do I respond, and who do I listen to? And where will we put our feet in terms of confidence about where we receive direction for our lives? And it's one thing for us to say, well, who do I listen to? In those verses, it just seems like God spoke, right? He was speaking through this prophet named Isaiah. It would be really easy for me to take the words of God, if I heard this audible voice, to know that God is with me. If I was absolutely certain about that, that's what I would do. But I don't know about you. I've never heard the audible voice of God. And so how do we understand that? How do we find that direction from God so that we can listen to God? Well, you know where the words of God are found? It's called the Bible. And God has revealed his words to us. And in here is not, hey, I don't think about God, and then I find myself in a crisis, let me go there, and God's just going to reveal it. That's not how it works. But often that's how it works for us. But rather the call is for us on a regular basis to lean into the words of God so that when the day comes where we need wisdom and direction and a sense of confidence about who God is and where he's going, we're already there. And to get really specific about this, I'm going to invite you to do something. You're going to hear more about this in the weeks to come. But in 2025, I'm going to invite you, challenge you, to read through the Bible with me in 1 year. And there's going to be a real specific way for you to get involved in that and to become a part of that. But as we hear the Word of God and we lean into the Word of God on a regular basis, we gain wisdom, we gain a sense of confidence about who God is and the promises that he has made, that he has every intention of keeping. Somebody once said, I've never heard God speak out loud. And I think the answer to that is, you want to hear God speak out loud? Read the Bible out loud, because they are the words of God. So let's do that in 2025, that we will commit to listen to God and what he has for us. And the story goes on again. The Lord spoke to Ahaz, and this is incredible because Ahaz is basically blowing God off. I'm not going to seek him, consult him, or do anything. And now God shows up and says, ask the Lord your God for a sign. And this is incredible. This is like the blank check thing. Whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights, he's like, just name it. And this is not a regular thing that God does. This is the dream that we all have, right? God, you just write it on the wall. I'll know it's you. And here's a king who has not looked in God's direction. God comes to him anyway. Says, ask for something, anything, and I'll do it. You see Ahaz's response? It looks really spiritual, but it's not. I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. And that's a bunch of baloney. You know why he's not going to do it? Because he's already made up his mind. He's going to trust the king of Assyria. not the King of the universe, and not the God of the Bible. And so what's God to do on the other side of that? I don't know if you were in that position, like, look, you didn't consult me, but I came to you. You didn't seek me and my direction, but I gave it to you anyway. And now I'm saying, you just go ahead and name it, and I'll give you a sign that I'm with you. And the king responds by saying, nope, I don't know about you. I would turn around and head out. You had your chance. That's up to you. But that's not the heart of God. Then Isaiah said, hear now, you house of David, is it not enough to try the patience of human? Will you also try the patience of my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. God says, you don't want it? I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to give you a sign. You didn't ask for one. I'll give you one. And it's going to be a sign of God's miraculous power. And here's where those words come from. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and we'll call him Emmanuel. And what does Emmanuel mean? God is with us. To a king who was blocking God out, God says, I'm coming anyway. And this will be the unmistakable sign of my presence with you. So let me ask you this question. Because maybe Ahaz thought, God, it's fine, that you're going to bless me in my heart every day, but I got armies coming at me. And I've got to turn to a real source of security for that, not you. So let me ask you this question. What do I think is too big for God? Or I think, it's nice for God to work in my spiritual life, my private life, but the thing that I'm dealing with in my real life, I'm not sure. What do I think is too big for God? And then those words about the virgin conceiving and giving birth to a son, they just laid there for a long time. And sure enough, just as God said, 65 years later, Assyria comes down, conquers Aram, and also the northern kingdom takes a lot of people off into slavery. But God says to Judah and the southern kingdom, don't get too cocky because they're going to exact a measure of judgment against you as well. Because I'm really more concerned about people's hearts turning back toward me. And Assyria looked like it was the nation that would never be conquered, the empire that would never end. But then along comes another one. It's called Babylon. And Babylon defeats Assyria. Also carts a bunch of people off. The story of Daniel and the lion's den and all of that takes place in Babylon. And it looks like Babylon will never be defeated. Nobody can stand up to them until the Medo-Persian Empire comes along. And the Medo-Persians defeat the Babylonians. And now they look like they will be the kingdom that will never end. They even refer to their king as the King of Kings because there will always be someone on the throne from the Medo-Persian Empire until the Greek Empire comes along and defeats the Medo-Persian Empire under the direction of Alexander the Great. And it looks like the Greeks will never be defeated until the Romans come along. And so it is in this world of ours, one empire after another. And yet the promises of God stand through it all. And what was said 735 years before Joseph and Mary ever show up, now in this day, Matthew makes it really clear that when those words were spoken, you know what God had in mind? It is here and now. Promise made, promise kept. And that's something important for you and me to remember. That the promises that God makes, He has every intention of keeping them. They don't always happen on our timeline. But the promises that God makes, He keeps. And so when we jump back in to Matthew and the Christmas story, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. So what does that mean? Does that mean that God is far off and has His thoughts with us? No. The story in Isaiah 7 says, I am here with you in this moment and everything that you are facing. Will you factor me in? God is with us. And God didn't just give us a way to Him. He came Himself. The way is God Himself, the eternal Son of God. And so what do we do on the other side of that if we are confident that God is with us? When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. If we are confident that God is with us, the next right step is to follow God, is to be obedient to the direction of God and the ways of God. And so a big central part of the Christmas story is that God is with us. Not nebulous, not mysterious, not far off. In the very lives that we live, even in ancient history and current times, God is with us. So let me ask you this question as we wrap this up. Where do I need to trust that God is with me? And there are promises that God has made, and he has every intention of keeping the promises that he made. He said things like, I will never leave you or forsake you. Sometimes it can feel like that based on our circumstances. Promise made, promise kept. God promises that he can use everything in our lives to conform us to the image of Jesus. And it's easy for us to understand that with the good things, but he even says he can redeem the bad things. And yeah, there are bad things. There are evil things that happen in this world. And God can even redeem that. But in moments where we journey through evil, it can be hard to feel that. Promise made, promise kept. Will we trust him that he is with us? Jesus promised that one day he's coming back and things will be eternally different than they are now. It's a promise that still has yet to be made, but promise made, he's going to be a God. Promise kept. It's coming. Will we endure? Will we journey through these days with confidence that all of this in our lives is going somewhere and it's going toward a conclusion that God will ultimately have the final say, the final word? Where do I need to believe that God is with me? Would you bow your heads together with me as I pray? In this broken world of ours, God, there are times we have questions and we have doubts and we can become afraid. And God, in real life moments like that, would the Christmas story shed some light on that you are with us. We are never alone, not with you. And so God, I pray that you would continue to do your work to build that faith in our hearts and lives, that we would more and more factor you in day by day to the lives you've given us. And as we do that, God, may we have a clear understanding of who you are and the things that you have promised and the directions in which you're taking us. And God, that it would just increase our joy of knowing that our great God is with us, come what may. And so thank you for who you are. Thank you for the things that you have done. Thank you for this season that shows us in such a personal way how willing you were to be with us in these lives we live. God, may our hope be in you, and we thank you for your grace along the way. And during this season, may we see you more and more on full display. And we ask and pray all of this in Jesus' powerful name. Amen.